is Kriti, and you're listening to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast.
Hey, Maverick. Yeah. Did you hear about ice? What's that? You want another one? Really? Yeah. I feel the need for speed. Ow!
I am Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, your senior drill instructor. From now on, you will speak only when spoken to, and the first and last words out of your filthy sewers will be sir. Do you maggots understand that?
I got a military-age male on a cell phone watching the convoy over.
If you think he's reporting troop movement, you have a green light. Your call, over.
Sometimes I wonder if I've changed so much, my wife is even going to recognize me whenever it is I get back to her. And how I'll ever be able to tell her about days like today.
You were in a 4G inverted dive with a MiG-28?
Yes, ma'am.
I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Thank You for Your Service, a hard look at American civil-military affairs from the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. I'm Nick Paraiso. Joining us today is our creative consultant, Sarah Claudy.
Thanks, Nick. And there's actually probably no better episode for a creative consultant to jump in on than today's. The portrayal of the military in media and entertainment informs a lot about what Americans know or don't know about the military. But far too often, Hollywood seems to miss the mark on portraying service members and veterans accurately. We see veterans on screen either as lionized heroes or broken, traumatized individuals, but we hardly see anything more nuanced. Those kinds of stereotype portrayals can widen the already existing civil-military divide.
We're excited to feature an interview we had with Chris Marvin. Chris is a former U.S. Army helicopter pilot, flying Blackhawks during Operation Enduring Freedom. In 2012, he founded Got Your Six, an organization that seeks to shift public perceptions about veterans and the military. They do community outreach as well as work with the entertainment industry to help create accurate portrayals of the military and veterans on screen. In 2015, Chris launched his own strategy and communications consulting practice, and he continues to work on community engagement and veteran narratives. Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
That's my pleasure.
So you began as a U.S. Army helicopter pilot, and now you're working on veteran narratives. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made that transition and why you decided to start Got Your Six?
Yeah, my story is pretty unique. I was an Army Black Hawk helicopter pilot and a platoon leader. I took my platoon to Afghanistan in the spring of 2004, which nowadays is relatively early on in that never-ending conflict. And I actually had a unique experience. I was wounded pretty badly in a helicopter crash later in the fall of that same year. I broke my foot and both of my legs and one of my arms, shattered all the bones on one side of my face, did damage to both my knees, both my hips, both my shoulders. And, it kind of sounds like I broke my whole body. I like to list them one by one for some dramatic effect, of course. But for me, being wounded like that gave me a new and different perspective on the way that society looks at veterans. As I went through a long recovery, I had a lot of different experiences with people, and I kind of saw through some of the portrayals and the perceptions of veterans, of service members, and particularly those of us who've been wounded. And it didn't always sit the right way with me. I found that there were kind of three ways, way back then especially, that people viewed veterans. One was with pity, and then for me as a wounded service member, that was clear and often that people would pity me. But that's okay. That doesn't feel that bad. I understand where people are coming from. The next one was charity. People want to give me things. Again, I understand that people are trying to do something, do their part. But what both of those led to, and what really bothered me, was that people ended up with low expectations of me and of really veterans as a whole, that, if we could just accomplish little tasks, then we would be successful. And so that might be, recovering from an injury or getting a job or not being homeless or not succumbing to PTSD or suicide or whatever the archetype dictated. And so with that pity, charity, and low expectations, I sort of set out change that narrative, to base my work in sort of the factual perceptions and portrayals of veterans, and to say that like veterans are leaders and civic assets that need to be coming home to our communities and making a difference and doing something to make our communities stronger. And how do we do that? And so that was the genesis of Got Your Six, this idea that by interjecting that narrative into Hollywood that was sometimes responsible for these portrayals and these perceptions, that we could make a difference in the way veterans are seen in society.
So do you think there's been any progress in the past decade or so? Like, what do you make of the military veteran portrayal today?
Yeah, look, I think that, I know from conversations in writers' rooms in Hollywood, 5-6 years ago, that there were definitely folks, and again, it's only anecdotal, but it happened over and over, that there were folks writing these scripts who just didn't even know a veteran, right? And we live in a time that's much different from, say, my grandfather's generation, where every male served and most of the females helped out in some capacity with the war effort around World War II, and Vietnam was different because it was a draft, and my generation is Iraq and Afghanistan, and we only have a handful, a few million people who have served overseas since 9/11, and so it's not that likely that a writer or a producer or a director is going to have that firsthand experience with someone who's been in the military. And so for us, we were just introducing really simple concepts like show a normalized depiction of veterans. Doesn't have to be a hero who walks on water. Doesn't have to be someone who's totally broken and damaged, which came across as the most prevalent two portrayals, right? It was kind of one or the other. And we're trying to say, like, what about the middle, right? Like an everyday person who has a job and a family, and he or she is, just kind of moving along and in their life. And I think that's the progress that we've seen. There are still films that valorize military service. There are still films that, sort of denigrate veterans in certain ways, or at least make us feel the pity, the charity, and the low expectations. But I think more and more we have seen these small moments of just having a character on a television show or a film say, I was in the Marine Corps, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be their defining characteristic. And it's sort of the overprevalence of those moments and having it in many shows and films that are going to get us to that real normalization that the veteran is just a past life or a past career for a lot of people that we might run across in everyday life.
So you're saying that these inaccurate portrayals of veterans in the military can be really dangerous and can widen the already existing civil-military divide, because veterans are so much more than just the very one-dimensional kind of characters we see on screen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that it comes from more than just on screen. I think that what you actually see more of on screen is, two things. When film and television, and I'm talking about narrative film and television, dramatic portrayals, when they're trying to show a veteran, they immediately jump again to either valorization or victimization. But when they jump to the victimization, it's usually not because they had a veteran and didn't know how to portray him. It's more like they had a homeless person and they wanted to give him a more dynamic backstory. And so they made him a veteran. But then that becomes dangerous because there's only, veteran homelessness is an issue, but it's, not something that we want to be the only portrayal, the only way veterans are portrayed on a show. Valorization tends to be actually a worse issue in dramatic portrayals, right? So you get this, we're only showing, but that makes sense too, because, through history, going back to, the ancient Greeks, we've told stories about, valorific heroes and Odysseys and epics. And, these are the things that stories are made of. So you can't totally blame Hollywood for wanting to grab, the American Sniper story, or something like that, some heroic story, and put it into film, right? But it doesn't show who a veteran really is. So it's kind of okay to tell those stories as long as the audience is somehow tempered in their expectations of who veterans really are. We don't all have Purple Hearts and Silver Stars and all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. News media, on the other hand, I feel leans really strong towards the victimization, mm-hmm. right? Because if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so you're going to see these stories about whether it's about a nonprofit that was stealing money or about a veteran who is the victim of some scam or some statistic about homelessness or PTSD or suicide, and they're going to puff it up. And whether that's, print media, online, television media, whatever it is, but the news and the journalists are often the ones who are, I think, perpetuating the victim narrative more than dramatic portrayals. But either way, and no matter how it happens, it's not accurate. It's not real. It's not accurate. It's not who veterans really are.
So you talked a bit about this tendency that we've kind of always had to maybe over-glorify the military on one side. So that's one side of the spectrum. And that obviously has some implications on the civil-military divide. But is there also a chance that it could contribute to a culture where it's forbidden to criticize or question the military itself?
Yeah, I don't think it's, I'm not sure how you worded it, but I don't think it's, we're in danger of creating that. I think that's where we are. I think that's absolutely where we are as a society, and it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, let me speak very frankly. Like, we are 17 and a half years into the war in Afghanistan. That war was authorized shortly after September 11th, 2001, by one vote in Congress, the authorization of use of military force, and has not been re-examined by Congress since then. To me, that is the biggest fundamental failure of our American democracy since South Carolina seceded from the Union before the Civil War.
Wow.
I truly believe that. Like, Congress is absolutely failing. And in that, citizens and constituents of Congress members are absolutely failing to hold their Congress people to their jobs to examine whether or not we should be at war. But the argument you get when anybody brings this up, right, and it typically is left-leaning congressmen and women who will bring this up to say, let's vote on the AUMF again. Let's put it into the NDAA, the Defense Authorization Act. Let's put it in there. Let's talk about it. Let's put it on the House floor. Let's debate it. The people who push back on it say that would be an insult to the people who are serving. That would be an insult to the brave men and women who, give their life or risk their lives for our country. That's garbage. Like, it is the opposite. You're continuing to put these people into harm's way for what? And that's a rhetorical question. The for what is up for debate. We can talk about it, and we might talk about it for days or months or years and come to a conclusion. And that conclusion could be, yes, we should keep fighting, or no, we shouldn't. I don't have a decision on that. That is for Congress to make. Just debate the subject. And when they don't, and when they use this overvalorization as a device to not do their jobs, that's where we fail as a democracy. And there's other ways. There's other ways we could get into that too. That overvalorization happens, on NFL fields. When people are trying to use veterans as a way to argue against their personal bias against Colin Kaepernick's ideological beliefs. That's also a major problem, and it goes on. And so that whole idea that anybody would try to hijack a veteran archetype or what we believe as veterans and say that we all believe anything, we don't, right? We all have a vast spectrum of opinions. So don't speak for me, and don't try to speak for all veterans in any of those cases, but especially if you're a member of Congress.
Do you think that this overvalorization issue, though, some of it falls upon the responsibility of veterans? Because a lot of these movies that overglorify the military, they come from book deals, right, that veterans are writing. And so to what extent does that responsibility fall on veterans as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think it deserves probably a longer conversation than we have, because, while I simultaneously agree with what you just said, I also think that one of the fundamental problems problems and sources of the civilian military divide is not only the numbers, right, and the small amount of people that have served in the military and are currently serving in the military, but also the fact that we don't talk about it. And so there's this weird dynamic in the overvalorization that actually makes people who didn't serve feel like they don't have a right to criticize, which means they don't have a right to converse. And so what you get is these totally benign interactions between civilians and veterans that are kind of like, thank you for your service. And then the veteran's like, oh, no big deal, right? And that's a problem, right? The way that conversation should go is it should continue. It should be like, where did you serve? What did you do? What was it like? How do you feel about it? I'm interested because I'm a civilian who votes for the people who chose to send you to